I often think of 1918 as a year when nations teetered between victory and ruin. The First World War was clawing its way toward an exhausted end, and behind every cannon blast, every telegram, every shipyard's whistle, there was money, the kind of money that could tip the balance of power. And in the United States, that power gleamed not in gold, but in silver. I've handled old Morgan dollars, thick, heavy coins that once filled vaults and pockets across America. Each one carried the face of liberty, the echo of the Wild West, and the weight of a nation's ambition. But in 1918, millions of them met their fate not in circulation, not in trade, but in fiery furnaces, melted by order of Congress itself. This was the Pittman Act, a law that turned American silver into a weapon of diplomacy, a bailout for global allies, and a quiet reshaping of the world's monetary system. It was a financial decision disguised as wartime necessity, and its consequences would ripple through the 20th century, from British India's silver crisis to the mines of Nevada and the birth of the peace dollar itself. I still remember the first time I read the ledger entries from 1918, 232,722 silver dollars melted. The numbers looked like a typo, but they weren't. That's 270 million coins, each struck from American silver, each representing wealth, labor, and history, gone in less than 2 years. So why did it happen? And what did it mean for the world? The answer begins far from Washington, in the markets of India, then the jewel in Britain's colonial crown. For centuries, India's economy ran on silver. The rupee itself was a silver coin, its value tied to the global price of that metal. But when war erupted in 1914, Britain's appetite for silver exploded. They needed it for munitions, for payment to troops, for trade in Asia. Yet silver prices began to spiral. India's demand outstripped supply, and as the metal's price rose, the British government found itself cornered. By 1917, Britain was facing a catastrophic shortage. Indian merchants hoarded silver, the rupee wobbled, and colonial finances trembled. If India's currency collapsed, it could cripple Britain's war effort because India wasn't just a colony, it was an economic engine funding imperial survival. So London turned to Washington. The United States, now entering the war on the side of the Allies, held vast reserves of silver, locked in vaults as coins that ordinary Americans barely used anymore. The Morgan dollar, minted since 1878, was symbolic, but increasingly obsolete in an age of paper money and checks. Enter Senator Pittman of Nevada, a man with silver mines in his veins. He understood that this crisis was more than a geopolitical opportunity. It was a lifeline for American miners, whose industry had been suffering from oversupply and low prices for years. Pittman proposed a deal. The U.S. would melt down up to 350 million silver dollars from its treasury reserves, sell the bullion to Great Britain at a fixed price of $1 per ounce, and in doing so, stabilize global silver markets, rescue the rupee, and help the Allies keep fighting. It was both patriotic and pragmatic. The British got their silver. The miners got a guaranteed buyer. The U.S. got to strengthen its wartime alliances and control global silver supply in one stroke. On April 23, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Pittman Act into law. The furnaces roared. Vaults were opened across the country, and one by one, silver dollars, coins that had survived panics, depressions, and the closing of the frontier, were dumped into crucibles and reduced to molten metal. I sometimes imagine the sound. The hiss of flame against silver, the clatter of coins falling into the melting pots, Liberty's face dissolving into liquid value. In all, 270 million coins were destroyed, about half of all the silver dollars ever minted up to that point. And those melted dollars, they crossed the Atlantic in bullion form, shipped to Britain, and from there, much of it ended up in India, recast into rupees to keep the colonial system afloat. But here's where the story turns global. While the British Empire stabilized its finances, the American West came roaring back to life. The silver mines of Nevada, Idaho, and Montana found new demand overnight. Prices rose, wages followed, and local economies revived. What had begun as a diplomatic gesture turned into a domestic stimulus. And yet, there was irony, because the silver that left America to save Britain's empire would, in time, return as debt and inflation. When the war ended, silver prices crashed again, leaving miners and investors reeling. Still, the Pittman Act contained another clause, one few people remember today. It required that for every dollar melted, the U.S. Mint had to eventually recoin the same amount once the war ended, using newly purchased silver from domestic mines. This was the government's promise to the mining states, that America's treasure, once exported, would one day be restored. So, beginning in the 1920s, the mints of Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco once again rang with the clamor of silver, this time producing the peace dollar, a coin meant to symbolize recovery and reconciliation after the war. That, is the strange beauty of the Pittman Act. It destroyed the old to create the new. It melted the symbol of one era, the Morgan dollar, born of the Gilded Age, to mint the emblem of another, the peace dollar, born of modern idealism. But beyond America's borders, the Pittman Act's impact was even more profound. By flooding Britain with silver bullion, the U.S. helped restore stability in India, but it also reaffirmed the global dominance of silver as the foundation of Asian trade. In China, silver continued to back the yuan. In Latin America, it remained the measure of wealth. The world's dependence on silver stretched like a web, linking miners in Nevada to merchants in Bombay, bankers in London, to traders in Shanghai. In this sense, the Pittman Act wasn't just about melting coins. It was about remelting trust, forging a new financial architecture out of crisis. I sometimes think of those 270 million coins as soldiers of a different kind, sacrificed not on battlefields, but in furnaces, not for territory, but for liquidity. Their loss stabilized empires, moved markets, and set the stage for America's emergence as a global financial power. Because, make no mistake, after the Pittman Act, the center of the world's silver trade shifted westward. London might have directed the transactions, but it was Washington that now controlled the metal's flow. America had not only financed Britain's war, it had proven itself the new engine of global finance. But, as with all great economic stories, victory came with contradiction. While India's rupee stabilized, the people of India suffered inflation and shortages. Silver's fixed price at $1 per ounce, a blessing for British accounting, became a curse for ordinary citizens who watched the cost of goods soar while their wages stood still. It is a pattern we still recognize today. When global powers manipulate monetary systems to serve political ends, it is always the everyday worker who pays the price. And yet, history often hides its lessons in these paradoxes. The Pittman Act reminds us that in moments of crisis, nations will burn even their own money to preserve power, that the metal in a coin means less than the confidence it represents. When I teach this episode, I ask my students to imagine an America where half the silver coinage disappeared overnight. Imagine vaults emptying, trains loaded with bullion, the Atlantic convoys carrying America's money across an ocean at war. And then, imagine the quiet irony, that decades later collectors would pay hundreds of dollars for the few Morgan coins that survived, unaware that they were once part of a financial sacrifice that saved an empire. There's one more layer to this story, one that reaches into the present. The Pittman Act revealed something profound about America's evolving role in global finance, the ability to weaponize resources through policy. It was a template for later strategies, from the Marshall Plan to the petrodollar system. It showed that currency, when used cleverly, could be as decisive as any army. Even today, as we watch nations discuss gold-backed currencies or de-dollarization, echoes of the Pittman Act linger, because it was one of the first great demonstrations that money is never neutral. It's an instrument of strategy. In 1918, silver dollars became diplomacy in molten form, and in doing so, they foreshadowed every modern moment when financial systems became extensions of political will. So yes, the Pittman Act may look like a technical footnote in America's monetary history, but stand before a surviving Morgan dollar and hold it in your hand. Feel the weight of liberty, the cool surface of silver? Then imagine that same coin, once melted, reborn, and sent around the world to steady empires and fuel wars. That's not just metal, that's history, distilled, liquefied, and recast into the very idea of what money means. And that is the story of when America melted down its silver dollars and reshaped global finance forever. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating, be sure to subscribe for more hidden histories.